Welcome to It's No Secret, a podcast for Kiwis who want their money questions answered.
Ready, steady, go.
This podcast will answer the money questions you may or may not have on your mind. We'll talk to real Kiwis and share truths about our own financial lives.
Both the successes and the failures. Because the truth is, there is no secret to achieving financial freedom. Hello and welcome to It's No Secret. I'm Kat.
And I'm Christine.
And today we're back with an episode of Season 3 talking about what do I need to consider when I'm moving my finances across borders. Now, I can't really say that COVID's ended because it hasn't. However, definitely in the stage where it feels like the borders are opening up. We're obviously hearing stories about there being a brain drain in New Zealand, people potentially looking at moving overseas either for work or for their OE. All that sort of stuff is opening back up to us. And so today we're going to be diving in with the financial lens to look at the things that you need to consider if you're either going for a short time or a long time or whatever that might be. And we've each had a little bit of experience with this. So that's probably a really fun place to start before we kind of jump into our fun checklist of things to consider. For those that have listened to the show a little bit, you would know that I'm Australian and I'm probably in the minority of Australians that have moved to New Zealand. I always get that people
So true.
I know, right? People are always like, why?
You're supposed to go the other way.
Yeah, like, why did you move here? But I've now been living in New Zealand for 5 years and I definitely can talk, I guess, to the realities of making a permanent move. Like that was something where my husband had lived in Australia for 10 years and we permanently were, well, for him, returning to New Zealand, me moving to New Zealand for the first time. It was that whole thing of like, how do you open bank accounts, find a flat, like figure out how much you need, ship things, like all that kind of stuff, reinstate yourself in another country. What do you keep in the country that you've come from, which is something that we will kind of talk about as well. And then I guess for you, Christine, you've kind of done not so much, would you classify it as an OE? You've done the travel thing.
Yeah, no, I did. I took a gap year once I finished uni and I did move to Denmark technically, but all of my and then I also did a uni exchange in Canada, and then a couple of years ago I decided to sell everything and was like, yeah, I'm moving overseas. But every occasion I didn't plan anything to do with my finances. It was all just like, oh yeah, I've got this bucket of money. Let's see how far it lasts.
Yeah.
Kind of thing.
Yeah. That's probably a good call out because I certainly feel like for us, whilst it might seem a little bit ridiculous also because I'm a very planned person, we made the decision to move really quick and then moved really quickly. Like there wasn't a lot of turnaround. I think it was maybe like 3 months.
Yeah.
Whereas maybe that's common for people. I'm not really sure. Whereas of course, for other people, they might be like, okay, this is something that I'm working towards in, say, a year's time or 2 years' time.
Well, I did it in a month, the most recent time. I was like, yep, I'm leaving. And then I honestly just sold my car. Like, I was like, I'll take a $500 hit on my car just to get rid of it. But would not recommend.
No. Well, see, so I guess, how we afforded that was we decided that we needed to, move overseas. We came up with, I don't even know how we figured this out, but we figured out we needed $18,000 for our moving costs. I think to like cover things, have enough money for like rent. Couple of months, exactly. Like also to buy some furniture. Mm-hmm. And then we obviously sold our car and a few other things. And then I just made Luke work overtime. I remember so distinctly as I was like, right, you want to move to New Zealand? We need to go earn
moving in with my parents.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, we need to go and earn some more money. You were going to move. You were going to like work overtime. Yeah. And that's kind of how we did that. But yes, if that's not an option to you, possibly planning a little bit more in advance would be good.
Yeah.
And then, there's lots of different things to consider. So the first starting point is really how much do you need to move?
Should we go back one step?
Yeah.
Just because thinking about you moving to New Zealand, I was like,
yes.
Well, why did you move? Like having
very good point. Very good point.
So just like the lifestyle aspect of it.
Yes, actually, because we were talking about this before. This is a great point to discuss. I think, whilst we're coming at this from the financial lens of what you need to think about when moving countries, you definitely need to think about why you're moving in the first place first as a starting point. And I think the reason for that is it's very hard in any part of your financial life to make a decision if you don't know what the why is.
Yeah.
And also you don't want to get into a situation where you can't enjoy the experience for what it is because you have a lot of guilt around what ends up happening once you get there. So as an example, you know, Luke and I moving to New Zealand has a very, very different why to say you wanting to go to Denmark and potentially just live there for a year.
Yeah.
And understanding what our drivers are and the experience that we want to have when we get there will really set you up for success. So, you know, with Luke and I, we wanted to actually move to New Zealand. We didn't know, I remember when we first kind of thought about it, we were very open that we were like, we're not sure if this is forever or if this is maybe like 5 or 10 years. So we tried to set it up to give ourselves a little bit of like medium term flexibility, but certainly still with a lens that it was like a longer term decision. And then that drives things like, you know, simple decisions. How much are we prepared to pay for in rent, for example? You know, what type of house are we looking for? Where are we going to live based on the fact that we both intended to get jobs? Like all those sorts of things are a different discussion versus if we were like, we just want to move to New Zealand for a year so that Luke can spend more time with his family and we can travel the country.
Yeah, exactly. Because also, like, if you wanted to travel heaps, you might be a contractor or, like, only get a job that allows you to take 3 months off or whatever.
Exactly. Exactly right. I mean, really little things. If we knew that we possibly weren't going to have a car for a period of time, or even when we did have a car, we would just have one car. And so we narrowed down the suburbs that we decided to look for rentals in based on the fact that we wanted Luke to get the Sky Bus to the airport. Like that was just a real simple decision that I guess impacted our finances, but was driven by what it was we wanted to achieve and kind of do when we were here.
Yeah, I feel like that is a very smart decision about the old Sky Bus.
Yeah. So having all the open conversations, if you're going with someone else, if you have a partner, or just, you know, encouraging yourself to think through that prior to actually considering what are the monetary decisions you need to make.
Yep. And I just want to double down on the point of thinking about what kind of lifestyle you want to live, because I think this is very common. You know, if you're a Kiwi listening right now, chances are you know someone or have a friend that's moved to London and kind of like done the big European trip. However, like it's one thing moving to the UK or anywhere really as a fresh grad on a like graduate salary, or, you know, if you want to go work in a bar or whatever it is, it's another thing, you know, moving when you're in your 30s or something like that, and you're kind of, your career is a little bit more possibly established, and therefore you have a bit more disposable income to possibly have the experience that you actually want to have. So there's like things around that to weigh up as well, and sacrifices possibly that you need to make now in terms of time to get to what the, you know, the lifestyle is that you want to live.
Yeah, exactly. Love it. Okay, so we've had some deep, meaningful thoughts about why we're moving as step one. Step two is figuring out how much money do you actually need to move. So there's obviously some really practical stuff here in terms of, you know, how much do you need to pay for flights? Like what's going to be the cost for you to get there? Do you need, you know, short-term accommodation solutions when you do land? And then what does like longer-term accommodation look like if you're moving particularly to get a job and live? How much do you need to take over with you? So is it going to be a situation where it's easy for you to potentially ship stuff? I know, you know, between Australia and New Zealand, we found that actually it was really easy and way more cost effective to just ship a whole heap of stuff, given it was a permanent move, rather than, you know, selling things that we wanted to like bring with us. I don't know, practical examples, like we both have bikes and a couch. Like, you know, we didn't want to sell those to then have to like buy them again. So do you have options or requirements around that? Do you need a visa? And do you have to pay for that? Or does someone that you are traveling with need a visa?
So do you need to get married now? No. Just kidding.
Which also costs money. You know what I mean? No. I mean, you can definitely get married for like very low cost. But thinking about, how are you going to enter the country, and are there costs involved to do that, particularly if they're things that you're funding yourself rather than potentially being funded by an employer if you've managed to secure work? That's something to think about. You know, if you want to go to a country based on opportunities, but it is quite expensive, can you look at making sure that that's part of like a deal? So I know 2 of my best friends live in Amsterdam. They moved from Melbourne to Amsterdam at a very similar time that I moved from Melbourne to New Zealand, and they needed visas and all that sort of thing. And one of them moved over because, well, they wanted the experience, but he was headhunted for a job. And as part of the negotiations with being headhunted, they got to have their flights covered. The business paid for their dog to also travel. It was quite expensive. You know, pets is one thing. Like pets to travel internationally was quite an expensive cost. They also, I think, managed to negotiate. So they paid for the short-term accommodation. I think it was about a month's worth of accommodation to help them find or buy them time to find a flat. And then, you know, covering basically some of those upfront costs as well. So they're things to think about.
It's quite common as well, that, right? It's like being able to negotiate that into your, you know, and maybe it's like a equivalent to a signing bonus or something like that.
Yeah, I think it definitely depends on which direction you're going and kind of the country that you're going to. You know, you do hear of like companies in the US and Europe that's probably more common versus I'm not 100% sure of, you know, if you're a Kiwi wanting to return to New Zealand for the lifestyle and then you're trying to negotiate in, you know, travel. But I mean, potentially, like it's just a case of you obviously don't receive what you don't ask for.
Exactly.
But also being realistic about what that looks like.
Yeah, I guess a key point there was headhunted versus like moving because of your lifestyle.
Yes, exactly.
Or,
you get them to make the first move, you're probably pretty certain. You can be in a good stead to negotiate those things.
Yeah, exactly.
So there's, definitely that. Then I guess we have, you know, this is a big one that we can get into. How am I going to get my money into that country? So, you know, one of the things that we need instantly, even when we arrive, is access to money from day one because you need to buy food at the very least.
Yes.
And so, you know, thinking through that I think is really important because that is one of those things that could become very expensive very quickly if you're just relying on your domestic
credit card or something.
In your domestic bank accounts. And also the call out that I would make here is if you do some research on what this is now, you'll be well prepared with what kind of documents you might need to have with you to be able to open new financial services accounts, i.e. you can't just rock up to a bank and open a bank account anywhere.
That's true, actually.
You know?
Like a driver's license or a proof of address.
Correct.
Or whatever,
So we had this whole scenario where in New Zealand, we were lucky because Luke, being a New Zealand citizen and having grown up here, already had a bank account. So that made it really easy. However, it was a nightmare for me to be able to open a bank account. And it seems so practical, but it truly was because I was not able to open a bank account in New Zealand until I had proof of address. I couldn't get a bill in my name until I had a bank account to pay it.
Oh, that's so ridiculous.
So in the end, the only reason, well, the way that we were able to open a bank account was they would accept our rental agreement. But of course, we had to make sure that the rental agreement was in both of our names. You know, that's something that you could easily like slip up with when you're doing your setup potentially. Just knowing things like that, I guess, would have helped. Thankfully, we obviously weren't in a panic situation because we had his bank account to fall back on. But just like really niggly little things, right? You know, you kind of go through. So that's definitely one. And then I love here, Christine, that you've added insurances and emergency funds. Very practical. Very practical. So
I do love my health insurance.
Yes. I mean, one thing with this, you know, that is a really big call out is it's very tempting to use your emergency fund if you have one already to help you move countries. Right? Like if you're thinking about doing this, I totally appreciate that you might be sitting there and being like, yeah, but I've got $5,000 in my emergency account. I'm just going to use that to book my flights. The trouble is, of course, is you're moving to a place or going to a place where you have potentially no support network because you have no family and like friends that could back you up. You don't have the familiarity of what the healthcare system necessarily looks like. And you wouldn't want to run the risk of getting into trouble fairly quickly. And I guess it's just, you just don't know. So certainly call out that it's really important to have a buffer, not only for medical requirements, but, you know, if you lose your job in said country. I have a great example of this. Luke, when he first moved to Australia, he had accepted a job, was moving to Brisbane for said job, moved there, his contract was cancelled.
So
it was just after the GFC hit, and they reneged on everyone's contracts, and he had no job. Like, that's not on the company.
No.
That's on you. Those things can happen, right?
Yeah.
And you never really know. So he was lucky that he managed to find something else fairly quickly, but you don't know that that's a guarantee.
Yeah. I remember speaking to some friends who were living in Australia, and obviously, you know, COVID hit, and a lot of people, particularly in the travel industry, lost their jobs. And from memory, they were saying that a Kiwi in Australia, you're not eligible for what we call the dole, or like government payments, or like support, right?
Yes.
And so they essentially didn't have any, unless they were able to get another job straight away, they didn't have like a fallback income to be able to pay their rent. And so if you don't have your emergency fund, that
could be crucial.
Like a huge risk, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's definitely something to factor into, you know, if you don't have an emergency account now and you're calculating what your total amount is that it's going to cost you to go, you definitely want to factor something in there as part of like the lump sum that you're kind of saving towards in order to help you move in the first place.
Yeah.
The other thing I love that you've highlighted is insurances.
Yes.
And this is very important, but certainly overlooked. And like just a simple call out is, you know, the public health system in Australia versus New Zealand, whilst we're not broadly different countries, is actually very different in how it works. And so at the very least, not making the assumption that the treatment in which you're used to having in the country that you're in is necessarily going to continue in the country that you're going to.
Yeah.
And at least just doing a bit of reading, right, to figure out, okay, what would I be entitled to? And then if I'm not entitled to anything, how do I kind of protect myself?
Yeah. And it's often more expensive if you're a foreigner in that country, right? I think that's also something with Australia. I remember speaking to a friend, and they were saying that insurance is really expensive in Australia in particular.
Yep.
And I would imagine same in the US.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Different countries. And I mean, also, that then on the flip side is, you know, you might be going to a country where insurance is included as part of your employment package. And that's, you know, potentially if you see that there are things that are offered to you in your employment agreement, making sure you understand what that means and, you know, you're getting the most of it, all that kind of stuff is super important. The other thing I guess I would call out here just quickly based on personal experience is, whilst those things might sound really boring, it's really easy for life admin to like fall through the cracks when you're moving countries and things are busy. Luke and I literally had this exact scenario happen where, of all people, we thought we were really planned and well thought through, and there were lots of things that we just didn't
even think about.
Yeah. Particularly with like insurances and stuff that caused us some issues probably the first year into like living in New Zealand. Yeah, right. And so
it's
definitely
like your income protection, right?
Our income protection for Luke and also like health insurance. We just let that lapse in Australia and didn't restart that in New Zealand, and didn't really have any appreciation for like how that might affect us. So those little things, it's definitely worthwhile slugging through the pain of paperwork and doing your homework.
But I guess also like allowing enough pre-planning time to actually do that without like burning out, I guess.
Exactly. Cool. So then once you figured out how much it's going to cost and you've nailed your paperwork, the next thing to think about is how your income is going to be affected. Now, the big kicker here is understanding tax, and we are by no means tax experts, and I will super caveat this with the fact that international tax agreements are really complex, and you 100% need to get tax advice if this is something that is a permanent, semi-permanent move or a concern for you. So, you know, particularly going to call out if you have assets in the country in which, let's say New Zealand, if you own a home here that you're keeping and you're going to be earning income from that, you need to know what the tax treatment of those assets are going to be. Same for like investments. You know, one common misconception is you need to sell all those things before you leave. You absolutely don't. You know, you can own assets anywhere. Like Luke and I owned our home in Australia for probably the first 2.5 years of living in New Zealand. We still have our superannuation over there. For a time, we had personal investments over there. Similar thing of, if we moved back to Australia from New Zealand, we definitely wouldn't, necessarily sell everything here. So just making sure that what are you keeping, what are you earning, and how are any changes to either, I guess, your assets or your income going to be affected by tax in both New Zealand and the country that you're going to.
Yes, definitely. And I think on the income piece, we have here potentially dealing with a career drop / salary drop in a much smaller market that is New Zealand. So, it's no surprise to anyone listening that Australia does have generally higher incomes than New Zealand. And so for you, when you were moving over, understanding what is your equivalent salary in the local market relative to where you're coming from, but also making sure that, if you're going the other way, you don't want to be taken for a ride and be paid 20K less than the person beside you because you didn't do the research in order to get the salary that is the market rate in the foreign country, right?
Yep, absolutely. So making sure, you do some research around the income and then also understand how tax is going to work. There is the one thing I would call out, because if people get confused about tax, is the main thing if you're going to research anything is just understanding where and when your tax residency changes. So residency around tax is the biggest thing, and it's often a very grey area because it's quite often to do with intention. So, understanding that, look, the IRD website is not a fun time.
Not the most user-friendly.
But I would say, do your research first and then go to an accountant or a tax expert if you need it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that leads perfectly into, while we're on the topic of the IRD website.
Oh, yeah. Student loans.
Yeah, exactly. So
we've talked a bit about this before, but yes, very New Zealand specific.
Yeah, we have a specific episode on student loans or paying off debt. So if you want to know more about that, go back and listen. But, an obvious one is that if you do have a student loan in New Zealand, you're not charged interest. And however, when you do head overseas, it's after 184 days abroad, i.e. 5 to 6 months-ish, that you will start to be charged interest depending on the size of your loan. But the current interest rate set on the 1st of April 2022 is 2.8%. So that's not insignificant, and that will compound over time. So perhaps putting together a plan of how you can pay your loan off faster while you're over there so that you don't accrue so much interest, or I know they have minimum payments that you must pay and then you get paid penalties or things like that. So perhaps just making a plan around that or paying it off before you do go.
Yep, absolutely. And that's something that, in the broader tax discussion, if I would definitely say, if this is a permanent move, and, I use the word permanent somewhat flexibly, is that, if you're going for 5+ years and your intention is, you're going to have a significant period of time overseas, you plan to earn a lot of income over there, you plan to build up assets probably in another country, definitely seek out tax advice, go and find out what the requirements are going to be, because once you're over there and you start doing things, it's very hard to unwind that, once it started happening.
Can get very messy.
You don't want to set yourself up in the wrong direction. So definitely seek out some advice, and hopefully in that, any tax advisor would talk through a strategy around your student loan as well.
Yeah, and KiwiSaver.
Definitely. Well. Yeah. Now, we've already touched on this one a little bit. We're definitely going to recap is, will you be keeping any money in your home country? So often there's this kind of misconception, because we get this a little bit at work sometimes where people ask us, they might say, I'm here on a working visa or a temporary visa, and I may at some point, I might stay in New Zealand, or I might at some point go back to my home country, but I am investing with Kernel. Can I keep my account? What happens if I was ever to leave? And you are not forced to close anything in the same way that I left Australia and no one really knew. It's not, unless you tell your financial services provider, they're not going to actually know until such time that you potentially do a tax return in the future, which then triggers with them that you are no longer a resident of that country for tax purposes. Now, It doesn't mean that I had to close bank accounts, or as I said, we had to sell our house, or we had to close investments. We kept all of those. And I think the call out that I would say with this is, from our point of view at least, we wanted to keep everything where it made sense for future flexibility, because now, as someone that is a tax resident and a permanent resident of New Zealand, it would be quite hard for Luke and I to go and open investment assets in Australia.
Yeah, right.
Because you're no longer treated as an Australian for the purposes of setting up those accounts, in the same way that at Kernel, we can't and don't generally accept foreigners, into opening an investment account here. Yeah. So I kind of err to the side of give yourself, obviously seek the tax advice for the structure, what makes sense for you. Yeah. But there's no harm in having an open bank account that has $0 in it, just so that if you ever did want to come back to New Zealand, you have that there.
Well, it worked nicely for Luke, right? When you guys moved back, he had that bank account open. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So, in Australia, we typically have now, we have kind of one main account that we have a credit card associated to, and a bank card with that we use every now and again, and that's it, and it just is easy.
How did it work with on your super your tax for you specifically? Because in terms of if you're not a tax resident, then you're not going to be taxed towards at the level of your income, so you might not be in the highest tax bracket. So then maybe because then you think about, well, should I take my KiwiSaver money over, and then it's potentially, or super over here?
Yeah, I mean, this is a really tricky one, and I think is where it's invaluable to definitely get some advice to what your scenario is. As an example, we decided not to bring our Australian superannuation over to New Zealand and combine it with our KiwiSaver. But the main reason for that is it is taxed in retirement. It's taxed a bit more efficiently in Australia versus in New Zealand. Yeah. And we also potentially have access to that money sooner under the Australian rules than we do under New Zealand rules, where it's just a blanket 65.
Yeah, right. Okay.
So we were happy with the investment options as well that it was in. I didn't feel like it was punitive to keep it, they weren't bad investments. It's invested in a Vanguard account. I'm not stressing over that. So, we decided to keep it there. But equally, there were things for a period of time when Luke was in Australia, he was in Australia for 10 years, he had a very small amount in his KiwiSaver that he never even looked at or considered. And whilst he was in Oz, we potentially could have done better things with that money. So that's where I think it's, as you say, definitely worthwhile thinking through your intentions, chatting to someone about your structure, getting a bit of guidance on what to do around tax. And of course, keeping money in any home country, I don't imagine many people would move countries and literally drain their domestic bank account to zero. All of us probably want some kind of buffer.
Something to go back
money.
to.
Yeah. Or just, just in case something pops up.
Yeah.
And whilst it is really easy to transfer money across borders through the likes of Wise and other, XE and other currency transfer systems, you do incur fees every time you do that. So, you kind of want, on the basis of leave a little bit, see what ends up happening in New Zealand, and then maybe a few months in or whatever it might be, you can then go from there.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah.
Love it.
Love it.
How are we feeling about moving? I'm man, there's a lot of admin that I didn't think about.
There is a lot of admin. I mean, look, I think if you're just going over for an OE, if it's more holiday experience enjoyment, you probably don't need to sweat it too much. If you're planning that, the vast majority of your career and earning potential and asset building financial life is going to be back in New Zealand, don't overthink it. But if, like many people, potentially in their mid to late 20s who have had to delay their OE because of COVID, they may have worked for a couple of years, earning good money, they've built up some savings, maybe they've got, a bit more money in KiwiSaver, they're halfway through paying off their student loan. There's a few more things to potentially think about just so that you don't shoot yourself in the foot. Because, as I said, once you enter the country, it's not like you can leave that easily for tax purposes, There's a lot of things that can potentially be triggered based on when you actually arrive and the situation in which you arrive and how that is and how you potentially complete certain paperwork.
Yes.
So particularly if, you're getting a visa or you're getting a employer-sponsored job. So you want to make sure that you're getting advice around that.
Yeah. Love it.
Yep. I definitely won't be moving anytime soon, though.
Yeah. I definitely need to save some more money.
The admin, the packing.
Yeah.
Actually, I must say the hot tip for anyone, I'm assuming you can also do this across broader travel, but for Australia and New Zealand, it was really good. We got a removalist company to ship a whole heap of our stuff because we didn't want to have to rebuy it.
Yeah.
And the best thing is because of customs, you're not allowed to pack it yourself.
Oh, how good.
So they just rock up to your
so
house. And they have to pack, like, box everything.
That's really fascinating,
it was delightful. Oh. It was great because I was like, this is so good.
Just sit back and drink while they're doing it.
I mean, pretty much.
Not that we're encouraging you to do that.
The downside was that those items didn't arrive in New Zealand for about 6 weeks, and I'm sure it's a lot longer now given all the shipping delays.
Gosh.
There are things like if it's a permanent move, thinking through some of that, because whilst we had a flat, we slept on a blow-up air mattress and had 2 camp chairs in our living room. And that was basically the extent of our furniture for about 2 months.
But then also like time delays on shipping it over, but also time delays when you go to the store and it's like you're waiting on your kitchen bench, which is going to be in July, right?
Exactly. And I think as well the other thing that we probably didn't do enough research on, which comes back to the whole like you can definitely not be over prepared, I reckon, in this type of area, is we just made some assumptions around how much things cost in New Zealand. We didn't actually do any research.
That's a good point.
One of the things that kind of caught us off guard is like we had grossly underestimated how much we would need to pay in rent because, you know, Luke's reference point was pretty out of date. And also we just assumed that rent in New Zealand would be cheaper than rent in Australia. And we were kind of using that as a comparison. So that, you know, changed what our outcome was. And then the other thing is we, you know, once we got here and sort of saw the cost and availability of just really simple things like appliances and, you know, things to set yourself up, we were like, oh, we should have just bought more of those in Australia and had them shipped.
Get the IKEA stuff.
Yeah, exactly. If I did my time over again, I'd basically buy an entire house kit, like set up and ship it to New Zealand.
Walk into IKEA and take one of those like set up things and be like, I'll have everything in this corner.
Exactly. Like, you know, we did simple things like we left Luke's TV with my parents just because we were like, oh, we'll just buy a new TV. And that we probably didn't need to do that. Like it wouldn't have added that much, you know, in terms of our shipping bill, but just to buy it. So the little things like that I'd potentially, just encourage people to do research on.
Yeah.
What a time.
What a time.
For those of you that are looking to go overseas, have fun.
Yes, enjoy it.
Enjoy. I mean, it certainly is a really good time and, you know, great time both from the experience but also potential opportunity around your career and other things as well. So
exactly. Go take those foreigners' jobs.
Oh my gosh. I mean, we do love New Zealand though as well. You can just stay here.
Just kidding.
It's great. Cool. Well, thanks for tuning in, everyone. If you have any questions or thoughts about this episode, we don't have a lot of links today, but we might just chuck a checklist up and links to a few good resources. Actually, we also do know some tax accountants, so that's probably a big one. We can send through some links to people that are very well briefed in both New Zealand tax law and how that applies to international, whether that's US, Australia or other. We will chuck those up on the website, so itsnosecret.co.nz. Otherwise, head over to our Instagram at itsnosecretnz and have a chat. Love to hear from you.